GM to increase truck production in Indiana following Trump's tariffs. So MAGA folks were, sending this around. See, the tariffs are working. Well, look at the fine print. GM said in a statement on Thursday that it will hire temporary workers. A big part of that strike was putting an end to this temporary worker business.
I mean, at Stellantis, I think it's even worse. They can just, bring people in and keep them on still kind of indefinitely as temps.
Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up.
Hey, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by Logan. You are a Stellantis auto worker in Michigan. I interviewed you on the ground there, 2023, during the UAW stand-up strike.
It's almost like he's existing in an economy that's running parallel to the one me and you and all the rest of us have to enjoy, where we have to, go, okay, well, I only got X amount of money and I need to buy this food to live. I need to pay rent to live, It's just like you're struggling to get by, even when you feel like you're supposed to be comfortable. Like, I could be 2-3 paychecks away from being homeless.
Spoke with you again last year, I believe.
The union bureaucrats aren't the ones who have to stand on the picket line. It's the workers who have to, the membership. Right. And they should be beholden to the membership. And, they need to give us the facts and tell us what they think's best. But at the end of the day, the membership needs to be the ones deciding the direction of the union.
And now we're speaking again because Trump's trade war has everybody in a tizzy. The media is very fixated on how it's affecting Wall Street. That's important, 401ks and whatnot are invested in Wall Street. But I want to focus on the workers because when people think about and what Trump is portraying as far as bringing the jobs back, a lot of people first go to the auto industry and how the auto industry, born in Michigan, Detroit, Flint, and for so long, all those jobs have been, most of those jobs have been going to Mexico, Canada, and whatnot. So Stellantis, on the same day, I believe, that Trump's Liberation Day, Stellantis announced they're laying off 900 workers in response to the tariffs, mostly in Michigan. They're also pausing production at their Windsor, Canada plant. Then you have here Detroit Stellantis workers brace for more layoffs after tariffs. They're terrified. That's from Detroit News. And now Stellantis is joining Ford, I guess, in preparing for, consumer spending to dry up because of the tariffs. They're going to offer customers the same discount they give employees for the vehicle. Seems like they could just do that in general, tariff or no tariff. But first, let me ask you, I know you can't speak for all employees and you've been out for a bit, but what's generally the mood there? I know before Trump's official tariff implementation, your colleagues were what, kind of like wait and see?
Yeah, people are pretty wait and see. And I want to give a little context about where people are at because, for Stellantis workers in particular, we're just coming off of a rough year, 2024, the company already was not doing well. I was laid off, I think off and on, for like a good 2 months last year. So a lot of us have already been laid off. There's a ton of people who are still laid off.
And for those for those that don't know, the company not doing well, was that just decreased demand, decreased sales?
It was bad management, in my opinion. It's just Carlos Tavares had the whole auto industry had this idea of, was it Sergio Marchionne said they're in the business of making profits, not cars. But, like I like to say, you actually got to build cars to make the profits, And if, you have super high inflated prices, people maybe aren't going to want to pay those or buy those cars, unfortunately.
Right.
So that's what I think put us in a bad situation. And then, since we're already in this bad situation, we're trying to recover from that. There's new leadership at the corporate level too. It's been, tension between the union and the corporation, more so than normal. And now you have this added factor of these tariffs coming in, and these are American built cars, but so many of our inputs come from all over the place. Our screws come from like Elgin, Illinois. We have airbags that might come from out of the country. We have all kinds of components that we're using in these cars that are coming from all kinds of different places. So for the auto industry and for any kind of secondary manufacturing like this, where you're building something up, costs are just going to get even more expensive for you immediately because that's the cost of doing business. You have to buy these parts, to build the car. So, that's going to just lead to higher prices. And, like you said, we're already seeing the effects on consumer demand from that. People are already, bracing for the prices to go up. So
let me ask you,
it's
because
just all around very bad.
let me ask you, because Trump, I don't put a lot of stock into anything he says because it changes within the hour. But his whole thing was, hey, to companies, if you make your products in America, you don't have to worry about it. There will be no tariffs. But you're on the plant, you're on the shop floor.
Mhm.
Yes, these cars are made in America because the plants are in America, but I don't know any American car company where every single component of the car is made in America. So
Exactly.
there is no purely made in America car. So by default, every car company will have to face tariffs, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Any car company doing business in America, regardless, Ford is going to face impacts from the tariffs because they have to source some of their parts from overseas, from Canada, from Mexico. I mean, the point of tariffs is to kind of build up, your industry again. So you think you do, small pointed tariffs, maybe like a steel tariff while you're, increasing U.S. steel production and subsidizing that. But what we're seeing here are just like what's the word? A sledgehammer being taken to the economy. 25 like massive, double-digit tariffs being put on stuff, and it's just all it's going to mean for working people is the government imposing a recession. It's just another form. Oh, it's all part of the austerity moment we're in. With Doge and everything doing all the cuts. It's just going to be mean everything's going to be more expensive for the working person, unfortunately.
What's interesting is, on one hand, I'm all about, and I know from you personally, your politics is pretty left. I'm all about, hey, let's do this. Let's make every component made in America. I'm for it. But the reality is, and you could say it better than I can, that's a long-term process. I mean, that's like changing supply lines. That's opening up a lot of different, it's not just opening up auto plants like assembly lines in America. That's opening up the different parts shops in America and training more workers how to make different parts.
Exactly.
Like, even if we could do that, which I'm all for, from head to toe, make everything in America, that's not something that could be done in the short term. That is more of a long-term assembly, changing the whole supply chain, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that you just simply can't build everything in America. Like, international trade is a necessity, but international trade needs to benefit working people. And all the stuff you're mentioning too, like the building up of American industry, it is best to build things with as many local inputs as you can. But the thing is, neither of the American political parties are going to be able to meet the moment and do what is necessary, because we do need to build up American industry, but we cannot build up American industry under this regime of private property and massive super corporate profits. We need government ownership of things, and unfortunately, government ownerships of things under the current government, it just means more tyranny. So we really, in my opinion, we would need a whole new political system to implement the kinds of economic, not even reforms, but changes you're talking, just systematic changes that would be necessary to implement that kind of policy.
Be careful. They might call you a communist with this kind of talk.
They might.
The thing also that's problematic, and I'm going to play Sean Fain's clip in a minute because he's for this, the UAW president. But it seems to me, I agree, tariffs could be a good thing for the auto industry, specifically if it was targeted to like steel, like you talked about. But in this case, I'd love your thoughts. It seems like he's just doing tariffs, but there's no actual economic plan behind it. There's no actual like
Exactly.
broad-based plan,
Broad vision. Yeah.
broad vision. Because to me, the last time you had massive manufacture in America before NAFTA, all that, that was spurred by the New Deal, really. And the New Deal was a massive government investment program, which we have not had in 40, 50 years. So if you're going to do tariffs, like instead of doing these tariffs, why not government invest massively in creating jobs or bringing back industry? That way, we're not as reliant on all these other countries for things. It seems like he's only focused on one piece of the puzzle, but not the other.
Exactly. That's the thing, because I have my own, like you said, analysis of things. But even from a capitalist perspective, like, and the New Deal was woefully like, what am I trying to say? Didn't meet the needs of the time. It was too little, but it was still something. It still improved the conditions of people and kept the economy from just completely spiraling out of control. And like you said, if you do these things and you're not investing in the economy alongside them, like investing in infrastructure, creating demand for these things, and creating demand for U.S. steel, but while also subsidizing it and maybe building some new plants and stuff, you're just going to ruin the economy. Even from a capitalistic perspective, there needs to be some sort of base. Consumers need a certain base, to live on. Prices can't exceed, what their wages are. Otherwise the economy just simply does not work.
Right. I want to bring up what GM is doing. I know GM's not your company, but it's all kind of the same ball game here. Because to me, I think I'm predicting right now, this is exactly what's going to happen. You have a headline. It sounds good. GM to increase truck production in Indiana following Trump's tariffs. So MAGA folks were, sending this around. See, the tariffs are working. Well, look at the fine print. GM said in a statement on Thursday that it will hire temporary workers for the Fort Wayne assembly plant, saying that will be part of operational adjustments at the plant to support current manufacturing business needs. All right. Well, the UAW strike, which is where I met you, a big part of that strike was putting an end to this temporary worker business. Now, the UAW agreement in 2023, it improved upon the conditions for temporary workers. I think for GM in particular, it went to 90 days. If you work 90 days, you become full-time. But at the end of the day, they're still temporary. And to me, what's going to happen here, GM, Ford, Stellantis, you're going to get more headlines. Hey, in response to Trump's tariffs, we're gonna increase production, or we're gonna open up a new plant. They're gonna hire more temporary workers. And what's to stop these car companies from firing them a day before they become full-time? Can you talk about the current status of temporary workers at Stellantis and elsewhere?
Well, I just want to say, what you said, that's exactly what they're going to do. I mean, at Stellantis, I think it's even worse. They can just, bring people in and keep them on still kind of indefinitely as temps. The situation at Stellantis just is such that, they're called supplementals at Stellantis. Is such that, they don't have a need for temps right now. At Stellantis, they're trying to cut back. But, to speak about, they're talking about bringing in temps. They're going to bring in, at every auto plant, this is something they do over the summer, because a lot of people take vacation. A lot of us are vacation. I know where I work, my vacation renews in May. So, people start putting in, their summer vacations right after that. And then they bring in some temps to fill those holes. But, the thing is, these people are not going to be really getting guaranteed long-term, jobs. And I'm sure at a lot of these plants, at a plant like that, like if they're doing it for production reasons, like right now, what they're doing probably, I'm not sure exactly how the contract works at GM, but I know where I work, they can work us 9 hours a day, 6 days a week. So, on top of, they're probably going to bring in a few temps to fill some holes, maybe make it so the line runs better. And then they're just going to, work everyone else harder. Because that's what they do in the auto industry. In the auto industry, you don't get an 8-hour day. That's like a fantasy in the auto industry. We work, 6 days a week a lot of the time. So there's places, in GM, I know people who work at Factory Zero who were working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, because they were in this perpetual launch mode thing. So there's
to be clear, this is still modern day. I don't want people to think this was before the strike and before the contract agreement. People are still working 6-7 days a week. People are still working, temporary workers, for example, without full health benefits. Temporary workers don't have. So the contract, was an improvement over the rump roast of the last 2 decades, but you still have, they're working you to an early grave.
Yeah, and it's not a record contract as the international and Sean Fain's leadership tried to sell it. A record. I know people. Like my father, he was I'm a second generation auto worker. He retired with a pension. If that was a record contract, we would have had better than pensions. And you have to do better than what you've done in the past for something to be a record. And like you said, it was better than the just awful, completely conciliatory contracts we had in the past. But it wasn't a record contract, and we should have never tried to sell it to people as such. He came to my local to, when they were having issues with Stellantis, and this is after he came to Toledo, where he called it a record contract, and he got booed by the people at Toledo. Sean Fain did. And he came to my local. There was no more talk of a record contract. So,
speaking of, good segue. Let me play some of what he said about this because, it has perturbed some of the resistance against Trump that Fain and UAW has been speaking in support of these tariffs. Let me play some of his explanation.
I've prepared a statement to address this. I'm joined here by the bargaining committee from Volkswagen for the UAW. Look, we are ecstatic to see an administration finally address the unfair trade laws in this country. These laws have destroyed the American working class. They've destroyed communities in this country and virtually every state for decades. So, we're talking about what President Trump said was a 25% tariff on vehicles not produced in the United States. Also part of that was the ability for Americans to deduct the interest off their loans for buying products that are made in America. So obviously we want to dig further into the details to have a better understanding of exactly how far these tariffs go. And we look forward to continuing to be part of the conversation with the administration going forward. But, as I said, the committee of Volkswagen, it's no irony to me that this happened today while we're right here at Volkswagen in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Just yesterday, we were at the bargaining table with Volkswagen, and we told Volkswagen their move to eliminate a shift here was illegal and not only harmful, it violates law, but not only harmful to Chattanooga, but harmful to America. Their action represents everything that's wrong with the American auto industry in the past several decades. So Volkswagen, as we speak, they have excess capacity right here, right now. So while they're breaking the law and eliminating a shift of workers, while at the same time, Volkswagen is the greatest violator of sourcing outside of the United States and bringing product back in here. 75% of the product they make in Mexico, they ship into the United States. That is criminal.
So obviously you could get the point. Ideologically, I'm in agreement. But again, the devil's in the details. If he was just doing a specific targeted thing for the auto industry, we might be in more agreement. But this is a smorgasbord of chaos. And again, the other thing is it really a victory if you get GM, Ford, Stellantis to increase production or open up some more plants, but they're just going to filter those plants with temporary workers and not, full-time, jobs with pensions and good health care. That to me just seems like Trump being able to get a headline out there. I brought the jobs back with no concern of what kind of jobs, what quality of jobs. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, my opinion on everything that Sean Fain said there is that it's disgusting.
Okay.
It's at the very least, just, like I say, I can understand if you want something to benefit the workers, but Yeah, what he's doing right here is the something that these fucking labor leaders have done for literally 150 years. It's this political zigzagging and triangulating, and it's just craven class collaborationism at the end of the day. Because, less than a year ago, Sean Fain was calling Donald Trump a scab. And now he's happy to see an administration that's, fighting for the American workers by putting massive tariffs on, goods, I guess. So it's just all very confused and backwards. And it's to me a big part of, solidarity is internationalist solidarity. And tariffs are something that, these are coming at the expense of the Mexican worker. So, to me,
but at the same time, in his defense on that, his job is to focus on the UAW workers in America. So I do get your point in terms of international solidarity, but we want Mexicans and Canadians and Chinese to have good jobs, but we also, that can't be at the expense of Americans either.
No, and it shouldn't be.
Right.
That's the thing. That's why what he should be calling on is for, GM. He should be calling on for the Mexican and the Canadian workers to make the same money we do.
Right.
Because that eliminates the whole point of offshoring in the first place.
Right.
And yeah, there just needs to be a more a class view of this. Because when you start talking about the American worker, what you're doing is you're dividing up workers by borders. Then now you're not talking about workers. You're talking about this worker and that worker. And, this worker is more important than these workers. And it ends up, what ends up happening is the whole working class internationally loses,
Yeah.
I mean, not to bring this back to the Russian Revolution, but this is why the Soviet Union collapsed, because of that whole policy of socialism in one country,
Yeah. I think with Fain, I don't agree with everything he's done. I think in this case, you're kind of in a rock and a hard place because Trump is a scab. He's long had a history being anti-worker. He's stiffed his own workers for decades.
Exactly.
Legendary as far as stiffing contractors, never paying them. But on the other end, a broken clock is, right twice a day. And if policy he's pushing might benefit your workers, you shouldn't reflexively come out against it because he's a douchebag. But I think the point is, devil's in the details. How is this actually affecting the workers? Because we're already seeing with GM, hey, we're increasing production, temporary workers. If Trump is the art of the deal, well, I think the UAW should be playing some hardball. No, it's not enough to increase production with temporary workers. The American government could say to these companies, which, by the way, Ford, Stellantis, GM, they have all benefited from subsidies from the American government, tax breaks, this and that. No.
Mm-hmm.
It's not enough that you're going to increase production. It's not enough that you might reopen a plant. These have to be certain types of jobs. The American government can say that, or we're pulling those subsidies because they've given, I think it was GM or one of them, maybe Ford, massive subsidies for electric vehicles.
Yeah, probably massive subsidies
all
for
of them.
Vehicles.
So the government could actually have some strings attached. So I think Fain, should be demanding that. And I don't think this approach is going to do what Fain wants it to do, even if he genuinely hearts in the right place. My last question, where does this go from here? He talked about this race to the bottom, but now we're talking about how, national house on fire. You're seeing layoffs at Stellantis. You're seeing layoffs at, you saw layoffs at Whirlpool. We're seeing, all electronics are going to go way up. 401ks, including MAGA folks, tweeting about their 401ks are in the shitter and they're turning on Trump. I think you're going to see people not being able to afford rent at this point. Credit, people having to max out credit cards. Where does this go from here for the auto industry? Because it seems to me these companies, they could give discounts now, but we know how these companies work. If their quarterly profits go way down, if they're not able to buy back their own stock, if they can't give out their generous dividends to shareholders, they're gonna lay more people off.
Yeah, and that's just exactly what's going to happen. Unfortunately, is it's just going to get worse and worse and worse as things compound economically. Because again, without like massive investment in a jobs program and all this other stuff, these like tariffs are just going to be a self-imposed recession. These just bad economic policy, like from any point of view, really. And I just, yeah, my thing is, I think we might see some relief at some point, because I think, Wall Street's going to put more and more pressure on the president to change course. The unions, obviously, this is another thing where we could step in and, throw our weight around, but it would require action that our union leaders, unfortunately, do not want to take. If we were to tell, like say, hey, we're going to try to organize a general strike or something to get some specific demand,
Right.
maybe we could stop the tariffs or, ameliorate, make the policy more sensical at the very least. But I don't know. We're just in, unfortunately, a very reactionary moment in this country, and things are just going to, get destroyed in this austerity regime. But workers need to more than ever be ready to fight back, join organizations that are trying to help people fight back, and, again, just get organized.
Let me ask you last question. As an auto worker, and you obviously have a class first perspective politically, put aside Trump's tariffs. To you, what do you think is the way to actually bring back auto industry and other industry into America? Obviously, we don't agree that broad, across the board tariffs are going to do it. But to you, is it just, hey, that day, that sun has set. We're never going to have, the manufacturing we had in the 60s, 70s, or we could have that. But how do you think we could really bring back manufacturing capacity in the auto industry?
The only way we will be able to bring back manufacturing capacity in the United States in any industry is through worker control and state ownership. Only way we will ever do that. There is no future for capitalism. To be developmental capitalism is fundamentally right now in a completely extractive and destructive mode of development.
So
it's tearing
essentially-
itself down.
So essentially, you're saying never.
Never, not under the current. I'm not saying never. I will never say never, because you always need to have hope that things can change for the better. Things are, you have to realize what needs to happen for things to change.
Right, but my point is never unless we got rid of, the donors, not violently, but we got rid of money in politics, the purchasing of our government, the special interest lobbies, and actually had a government that represents people.
Yeah, if we had a workers' government, if we had a government that wasn't a dictatorship of the ruling, capitalist class, then yes, I think we would be able to solve these problems. But unfortunately, we have a government that is in fact a dictatorship of the capitalist class.
And, I lied. One more question.
I'm always happy to answer another one.
I'm trying to be balanced here because on one end, right now, we have a moment where there's certain people on the internet, and I'm hearing from them, and they're unsubscribing because, everyone's a snowflake. And if they don't have their pre-existing views fed to them 100% of the time, unsubscribe. But there's some people who said, Jordan, now's not the time to criticize Democrats. All unite against Trump. Great. But the problem with that is, how did we get this guy two out of 3 times, right? So, yes, I understand the concept. If the house is on fire, focus on putting out the house. But don't you have to focus on why is the house continually on fire? Don't you have to focus on maybe the fire department showing up with super soakers rather than the full? So, yes, the house is on fire, but we're going to keep going in these cycles if the fire department, which, bad analogy, the Democrats claim they're the party of the working class. If the fire department is just not willing or capable to put out the fire, all right, you put out this fire, you go back to normal, meaning put the Democrats back in power. They then give you the same old crumbs and excuses why they can't do anything really bold. The people get fed up, and then they put in a less bombastic fascist. I mean, that's really the cycle that's been going on, only it's been Trump for a decade. So I ask you, you got in Michigan, you got, what's the longtime Michigan Congresswoman? The name's escaping me. Debbie Dingell.
Debbie Dingell, yeah.
Yeah, you got Debbie Dingell. You got Tlaib, who I would say is better for what we're aligned with. But in general, the Democratic Party, they along with the Republicans, pushed NAFTA through. I mean, Hillary and Biden wanted TPP. They were both pushing TPP. The Democrats now are basically just showing up to rallies and protests and just saying, down with Trump, which has been their message for the last decade, without offering anything as an alternative. But to me, as a Stellantis worker, you have layoffs now. Obviously, Trump is the bad guy in this picture. But do you see anything coming from the Democrats that makes you think not only could they help stop this fascism, stop this insanity, but actually improve systemically, auto workers' lives, for example?
No. That's the short answer. But, to give you a kind of a long view, I would say, you went back, I don't know, maybe a couple decades. I would say that the problem with the Democrats, at the very least, it just goes back all the way to, when they first really consolidated power and were able to hold on to things for that, 20 years through Roosevelt and Truman. Even then, there were constant calls during the depression for things like a labor party or an independent labor movement. And labor leaders would constantly tell workers, we need to work within the Democratic coalition. The Democrats will give us, the Democrats would back then were making really great promises and even carrying through on a few of them. Now they don't even, there's not even a New Deal vision that they're presenting to anybody. So back then, like I said, the New Deal was woefully inadequate for the times. And we don't even have people who had, their vision for the times now, the Democrats, is like some means-tested thing that maybe only, a few thousand people can actually use that, doesn't really help anything. So, again, you got to understand that both of these political parties, whether you're talking about the Republicans or the Democrats, just represent different parts of capital. They're two halves of the same coin. And honestly, the Democrats, they work more as a controlled opposition party than anything else, because do they ever undo any of the policies of the Republicans? Not that I've ever seen. Barack Obama Barack Obama said he was going to do all this hope and change, and then he just continued the Iraq war. He intensified the Afghanistan war, just set the stage for, everything we're, living in now. It's just these people very clearly don't have anything.
Biden didn't get rid of Trump's tax cuts, and he had control of Congress. Yes, by one vote, but they still had control of Congress.
He also didn't get rid of kids in cages or, the massive migrant camps. All that stuff was still going on. The media just stopped reporting on it. And, also with Biden, it's like, this is just my personal point of view. I wasn't going to vote for him because I'm not going to vote for somebody who's been materially supporting a genocide, for over a year at that point. It's just insanity to, try to play, lesser of two evils when, this guy is just carrying out some of the most craven and disgusting imperialist policies I've ever seen in my life.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you, Logan. Disgruntled auto worker, my favorite kind. Not disgruntled. I want you to be happy, but I like the description. I like a disgruntled auto worker too. Trust me, they're the best fighters. and a long beard. Some might say you're a little too radical for them, but I think you're just the right sweet spot. We'll stay in touch. Please keep us in the loop as you get more feedback from Stellantis workers, other workers in the auto industry, and we'll monitor what's going on. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, anytime, Jordan. My pleasure, man.